I'm especially excited for today's guest and an honored guest from one of our biggest best ball providers in the industry, Underdog Fantasy, Hayden Winks. Been around the fantasy space for a long time. One of my favorite people to talk to on many subjects. And I think we'll get into a lot of fun stuff today with Hayden, from prospects, from data to best ball advance rates and all sorts of fun stuff that I love to poke fun at. And we'll have some fun conversation, maybe get to know Hayden a little bit more. But I'm really excited for this one. Hayden Winks, Underdog Fantasy, Best Ball Bros. Let's have some fun. All right, Hayden cheated. We talked before the show that he said he's watched these already, so I can't sneak up with the intro question that I'm trying to ask everybody, which is basically, what is your worst fantasy take you've ever had? I tend to think it's more fun when we do it like a player specific take, right? Like, this was my favorite player in the 2014 fantasy football drafts, and it was awful. What is the worst take you've had in your fantasy football career?
Well, last year kind of attached myself to Trey Sermon, which hasn't worked out too well. I'm still leaving the light on for him. Maybe it's a different type of offense. Debo gets out of the backfield. So I'm not completely tanking that, but that's what happens when they're like last year's class. And it's good to talk about this year's class too. There was no RB4. Like, it was Kenny Gainwell. And I was like, no, screw Kenny Gainwell. He'll never be something. Trey Sermon, if he hits, he can be something, just the way his size profile was, the school he came from, how they used him like in burst. And I was like, all right, I'm going to go be a little contrarian and say he's my RB4, but you can force it when it doesn't exist. And that's like the learning lesson with Trey Sermon from last year. You can kind of make the same thing with RB3 this year. Like, I was about to like get really deep into like Rachaad White is like clearly the RB3. And then I'm like, no, I'm not going to force Trey Sermon for sure.
That's such a funny example that you bring up as it relates to, like, literally we're recording this a week before this year's NFL draft, and the running back thing. I think the entire draft for fantasy purposes this year is fascinating because it is kind of unlike anything we've ever seen, really. With, like you said, the running back thing is bizarre. The wide receiver group is deep, but not super amazing at the top. Like, it's fine at the top, like, but you know what I mean? So the running back thing is so funny because we all want to put out content, put out takes. I have mine, you have yours, whatever, but you outlined literally like the perfect thing is, honestly, in a week we're going to know who the RB3 is. It really doesn't matter what we think right now, right? I mean, there's people out there talking about Sean Siegel and some others. Like, I don't think Rachaad White's going to get drafted. And I might have put him as my RB3 before, same thing as you before. And so with it being the draft in a week, I think it's a really, really interesting time from this kind of prospect perspective. How are you view, you've done all the work. You kind of outlined this, like, putting my hands up and don't really know about some of it, but how are you, like, if you're doing any best ball drafts or any dynasty drafts or anything like that, how are you kind of approaching that beyond, I think people know Breece Hall, right? Kenneth Walker or whatever. Beyond like that, how are you kind of thinking through that?
Yeah, I think there's certainly a debate between Breece Hall and Kenneth Walker. I don't think either of them are perfect prospects. Breece Hall checks more analytical boxes. I thought that Kenneth Walker was a much better runner. The receiving profile, it is what it is. Beyond that, like, all my modeling and all that stuff, it's super reliant on the number one predictor of NFL success, which is draft capital. I try to do projected draft capital based off of like where Dane Brugler has him in the 7th-round mock draft, where he has him in his own rankings, where Daniel Jeremiah is ranking him. Then we have the consensus mock drafts. But all right now, like, you can get Zamir White as your RB3, Isaiah Spiller's draft projections all over the place. So like right now, it's impossible. I gave, like, this year, I think I gave Breece Hall and Kenneth Walker late round 2 grades if I was like drafting a team. And then like the rest of the class, I gave out like a ton of early round 4 grades, and just kind of depends on what type of back you're looking for. For fantasy though, like I kind of like James Cook, but like maybe not so much for fantasy. Same with like Kyron Williams. I can see him having a role, but maybe not so much for fantasy. And then like Zamir White could never play an NFL snap, but Zamir White can easily be the RB3 in this class. So we'll learn next week.
Right. And like Tony's even asking about Hassan Haskins. It's like there is, after those top 2 guys, like an almost infinite list. You could make a case, and we'll, like you said, we'll find out specifically for best ball purposes. The landing spot is even more important. Maybe for, if you're playing dynasty or redraft, mainly dynasty, it's definitely very different. Your kind of talent eval is a little bit more important. But like in this space that we're in, it's like I can talk till the cows come home about maybe Kyron Williams is my number 3, and that's who I believe in. But like if he goes in the 6th round and he lands on the freaking, I don't know, Chiefs behind CEH and Rojo, it's like who gives a shit what my take was before. So I do want to really quickly just kind of pick your brain about the prospect and NFL draft thing before we move on. Is that like something you've always been into? We talked a little bit before the show, but like, is that something you grew into, like really diving into the prospect space, or how has that just kind of evolved for you in your career?
Yeah. So when my break into the industry was through Evan Silva just on Twitter. And that turned into like guest columns on RotoWorld, but they didn't have any full-time job openings. So like the easiest way for me to break in was as a part-time writer for the college prospects on their NFL draft in college website. So I was doing like some of the player blurbs over there. And so I was basically a full-time employee for my first year in the fantasy space, doing the college football section with Thor. And then I ended up flipping over to the NFL section at RotoWorld. And there wasn't that many people doing like pure analytics for the NFL draft, which I found surprising because there's just so much data out there. And I think there's a lot of like, we have time to like analyze it. So like, especially like defensive players, like how much the combine actually matters. That stuff is like very easy to kind of take my background and start applying it. And even if it's not all that helpful, it's at least interesting. And I've kind of just like stuck with it.
It's definitely very interesting. I love all the draft stuff because, it's a little bit similar to like this silly best ball game that we play, this fantasy football game that we play, where like there's so much data, information, even like beyond that, like there can be someone can watch the film, or, similar to that from a best ball perspective, someone can say, I think the team is going to do this, right? With pick a player or whatever. They're gonna, using last year as an example, they're gonna wean JD McKissick off of some of the passing downs and give more work to Antonio Gibson. Like that's fine, and I can understand that totally, that perspective. But you have to weigh all of this stuff, right? Like you said, the data, the analytics, the film stuff matters. It matters in real football. It matters in the draft process, and then you weigh the landing spot. You weigh all of these things. And I think it's just a fun kind of evaluation process of not like trying, other than Josh Norris trying to be the most accurate. It's a fun process, like the mental gymnastics of going through and figuring out those kind of things. I don't know if you kind of enjoy. That's how I enjoy it. Like I used to do the mock draft thing, when I was younger or whatever. So I don't know if you view it kind of through the same lens.
Yeah. So like for analytics in the draft, I will not post anything that's purely analytics. Like there's no point in doing an analytics model if you don't have a film grade or a projected draft capital. Those are the things that make the most predictive power. Like even like production for wide receiver doesn't really matter nearly as much as draft capital. Like if you don't have a film grade, it doesn't matter. And what's the other good thing about like consensus big boards is consensus is powerful. Like that's in any industry, the consensus is a powerful tool. So if you're ignoring that, you're shit out of luck. So for me, the film grade matters. And when like my model, it gets me in like the right kind of like tiers, kind of how I view it. Like if my model is like, all right, he's a 30 percentile prospect, like he's probably gonna be really bad. But like if there's the 94th percentile and a 90th percentile player, like I'm gonna watch the film and like, kind of debate which one I think's better. And I think the film, the reason why I watch like all these players is like the context is key. Is like how is he winning? Like what part of the field is he winning in? Because some players just are never going to be fantasy relevant even if we think they're good, like Wandale Robinson this year was popping in the model, but you can't be that small, and you're not going to play in 2 wide receiver sets. And if you're not playing in 2 wide receiver sets, how are you scoring touchdowns? And on Underdog in half PPR, like I don't care about the backwards pass for 6 yards. Like that's just never going to move the needle too much. So I think that's where the film comes into play for me, is I'm trying to figure out how is he going to be used in the game. The model is going to tell me how good he is, but I need to also know how he's going to be used, because I want to be super into player archetypes, especially this year. There's like, you've kind of influenced me to be really into player archetypes, eliminate players that just will not matter for the type of game we're playing.
Yeah, that was the biggest thing when I started to fully dive into this whole space, was kind of the archetype thing, where it's like it's you mentioned like consensus, right? From a projection, from a ADP, market ADP, all that kind of stuff. Like the wisdom of the crowd is pretty much just going to get us there on the majority of things that we need. And it's not really worth a lot of my time to dive into whether, X 5th round pick is better than other X 5th round pick if their projection is the same and their ADP is 1 pick apart.
Yep.
But I can spend my time putting these guys, and you talked about this today or yesterday, whenever it was, on the podcast with Davis Maddock, which was really good. Everybody should go listen to the Take Cast. Hayden did a kind of a best ball preview with Davis, and you talked about the archetype thing, and that's largely what I spend my time kind of assessing, because like people think about it like, oh, he's a rookie or he's a passing down back or whatever, but there's a lot more nuance to the archetypes, and I think that's where the real edge is like not just rookies, but like what is, I'm trying to think. I just wrote an article today, so I'm biased. These names are coming to my mind, but like, what is Rashad Penny's archetype?
Yeah.
Right. Like, how do I identify someone like Rashad Penny? Because it's not even just a handcuff. Like people will say like, oh, he's just a handcuff. That's not it. It's a deeper level than that. And so I'm glad that you brought that up, because that's like one of my biggest things. Like if I were, well, Jason, you're in the chat. We will get to your question, I promise. But like if I were talking to early people in like, how do I get into best ball? How do I make sure, I'm not paying the rake? It would be figuring out like these archetypes of play, go through the entire top 200, 240, 250 or whatever, and like kind of like classify these players. What is it? Like, what is James White? What is Rashad Penny? What is, James Conner? What is, et cetera, et cetera. Amon-Ra St. Brown, right? When you start to put these archetypes together, you start to figure out why Jamar Chase is a league winner and why Amon-Ra St. Brown is a league winner, and on down the list.
Yeah, the perfect example is this ambiguous backfield debate. And it's like, should you draft the first guy or the second guy?
Yeah.
That debate is irrelevant to me. I want the one that if an injury breaks his way, he's going to be on the field for all 3 downs. Period. Yep. If that's first, he's first. If he's drafting second, he's second. There is no value just because somebody was the later running back. Last year, the perfect example, and it worked perfectly, Chase Edmonds. Maybe he can be a 20 touch player in like 2 games, but there's just no way his body type is just the way that he's was used in college, his size profile, the way he was used in the NFL. He was just never going to be that type of guy. James Conner, meanwhile, has the size. That's how he was used in college. That's exactly how he was used in the previous, literally 3 seasons in Pittsburgh. So if James Conner was being drafted in the 7th round and Chase Edmonds was the 11th round pick, James Conner is still the value to me, because if things break his way, he's going to be a top 10 fantasy pick. Chase Edmonds will never be that. So like fast forward into this year for the Dolphins, Raheem Mostert and Chase Edmonds are both probably being drafted around like the 10th round. To me, I don't see a player that's going to be a top 20 overall asset. Either one of them gets injured. So I just am going to be eliminating them. I don't think that offense is going to be super elite. It's going to probably be better, but I would just rather go for an Alexander Madison. Like that's the type of player who can be a top 20 asset. So it's the ambiguous backfield. It's not first or second. It's just if things break your way, how much am I going to be profiting off of that selection?
100%. And to the Dolphins example is so perfect, because there doesn't have to be this guy is the right choice or this guy's. It could be neither.
Yes.
Or it could be both. Maybe the backfield has 2 James Connors, right? I'm just pulling something out of my ass. Arizona had James Conner and Leonard Fournette were the 2 running backs in Arizona. That's the ambiguity between those 2. It's like, well, if either one of them goes down, the other one is going to be this workhorse. So both can, maybe now I do want to split them. That doesn't happen very often, but but it doesn't have to be like, oh, Chase Edmonds is the starter, Mostert's the backup, so I'm going to take the cheaper guy. Or, there's other research out there that you should take the more expensive guy. It's like,
yes,
no, like that. I'm not like throwing shade on any of that research, but I'm saying we can think a little deeper than that, right? Like it makes me so sick to my stomach thinking about last year with the Tampa Bay Bucks, because
it was right there.
I mean, it was so easy. Like
Yeah.
you look back now and you're just like, what the fuck was I doing? That was so obvious.
Tom Brady's running back. Like literally, it's so easy.
And there's 3 guys. And so I'm not even hating on why like we drafted guys where we did, why there was ambiguity, whatever. But there's one guy who literally cannot play on passing downs. So it doesn't matter what happens for Rojo. He's an early down runner. He's a good one, but he's an early down runner. And an early down runner who can't catch and can't pass protect. Clearly a great fit with Tom
Brady. Tom Brady. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that's the guy.
Bruce Arians too.
Exactly. Too. Bruce Arians and Tom Brady are going to love this dude who can't catch and can't block. Right. I'm sure. So yeah, genius taking him. And then Gio, who like, I think honestly, I talked myself a little bit into the fact that Gio maybe had some of the upside to steal more of the backfield, but in reality, he was a passing down back with maybe a little bit of early down chops upside, but he was like, maybe his upside was James White on steroids.
Right.
So like,
that's the thing is like, it's like in theory, Giovanni Bernard has it, but like for how long in the season would he have that role? And like, what are the actual chances? Cause like we play this like ceiling game. Like I don't want to play like what happens at the top 1 percentile outcome. Like, I'm more like, all right, if 1 in 10 seasons, like how good is this outcome? 1 in 20 seasons. Cause that's like kind of the baseline we're aiming for. Not like the top first percentile outcome. Like you can't play everything about the top first percentile outcome. Like that's what it would take for Giovanni Bernard. The bigger thing with Giovanni Bernard, if you make less money than Best Ball Mania winner, you cannot be on the draft board if you're a veteran. He qualified, and I'm worried that the player pool is going to start really diminishing as Best Ball grows too much. I'm already curious about how many players I'm going to have to eliminate for this next season. So it's gonna be an iffy. Yeah, it's gonna be a little iffy now.
You're gonna have to do like the winner of the puppy soon.
Exactly.
In 2 years, it's the winner of the puppy as opposed to Best Ball Mania, because the winner of Best Ball Mania is gonna make more than like 80% of the 80%.
It's only quarterbacks eventually.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
And Christian Kirk.
And Christian, literally whoever is the most overpaid free agent of the year. Christian Kirk, that's such a funny story. So we're pivoting now to a new question I'm bringing up. So I stole these questions from one of my basketball podcasts that I listen to. So anybody that knows me, I'm stealing some of these questions. All right. So here's the classifications that you have to provide to these 4 answers. Okay. You have to start one of these. You have to bench one of these. Okay. You have to trade one of these, and you have to cut. So you have four things you got to do: start, bench, trade, cut. Okay. Robust running back, which I know where we're headed because of your what do we call it? Superhero running back, hero running back, and zero running back in Best Ball Mania specifically.
Yes, I think the superhero, and that seems like that's going to be the new definition of 2 running backs, I'd say, in the first 3 rounds, and then don't draft another one till round 9, round 10. I think that's going to be kind of dependent on each year when we're actually like doing our rankings to see like where the best pockets are, but generally you're banking on those 2. That's my favorite. I'm starting that one. I think I'm going to cut robust RB. Don't.
Interesting.
Yeah, I'm mostly trolling up here. The reason why I don't really like our robust RBs, I think some of the win rate data is good. Maybe you can sell me if you go like running back, and literally only draft 3 running backs. Like now you have my interest. But if it's like running back, and still drafting 2 more later, I'm going to be a little bit less interested. So I'll probably cut that one.
Literally the person who won $1 million on DraftKings here is saying he started superhero. What Tony, what I know you had Najee, because you won't shut the hell up about Najee all off season, but Najee and I don't know, JT or something like that were his running backs. But I love to hate on running backs, but that makes a lot of sense. So we're starting superhero, we're cutting robust. We have 2 more.
Yeah. Well, I mean, what's better, trade somebody or to bench them? I like probably hero RB second best, and then
Bench is definitely second best.
Yeah,
you're still on the team. You're still on the
well,
team.
at least I got an asset if I can trade them. Because some people will buy the hell out of zero RB.
That's true. Did a running back get traded this year? Because benching would be like Trey Sermon, and
now you got my interest.
I don't know if a running back got traded, but there was a running back that got traded. Compare them to Trey Sermon. Yeah. So I don't know what the right answer is. I mean, Trey Sermon, it can at least get in the game when somebody gets hurt. When Eli Mitchell gets hurt, that's trading. It's over.
Yeah, I think I go superhero, hero, zero, then robust. But I think I like all of them, man. And I've been leaning towards superhero RB. I think the data has been not just on Underdog, but even on other sites before you've started working on Underdog. That's what was winning on some of the other sites. I think it makes structural sense to not be investing too much into the position. But those top 12 running backs every year, they just score the most points. They're pretty bank. I know it's very boom bust, but when they're booming, it's hard to make up some of those points. I just don't want to keep investing into that position. That's why I don't like robust RB as much. But with all that said, if you want to get super contrarian, if you like a zero RB team, if you go 6 wide receivers in a row and then don't draft another wide receiver, I'm back in. I think the way we're currently drafting zero RB is incorrect, where we're drafting too many wide receivers. People always say oh, well, I know 2 of my wide receivers are going to get hurt, and then I need to win with depth and ping pong the weeks. No, you've invested into the position too much. If you're zero RB team, I'm in if you draft 6 wide receivers in the first 8 rounds and you stick with those 6. Mm-hmm. That's I want to get crazier than what the consensus is. I just don't like zero RB and you still drafted 9 of them. That's just way, way, way too much into one position.
Yeah, to toot my own horn, myself and Peter Overzet finished in the top 10 of Best Ball Mania 2 last year with a zero RB team. James Conner was our first running back, I think.
Yep.
So we pushed it really far, into the double-digit rounds, as people are probably not surprised to hear. But we took 8 wide receivers. So we had 2 quarterbacks, 2 tight ends, 6 running backs, and 8 wide receivers. And kind of to your point earlier, it was all backup running backs or ambiguous backup. Yeah. James Conner, Alexander Madison. We took Sony Michel. The real winner was in the 16th round we took Rashad Penny, and in the last round we took Sony Michel when he was still on the Patriots.
Of course, you have a vision.
Clearly we knew that he was going to go to the Rams and play every snap for the second best offense in the NFL. But I
mean, you just real quick, you just laid out an archetype of players. All those running backs are, I would guess, over 210 pounds. If they're in, they can be the goal line backs. With you just drafted a bunch of backups and ambiguous backfields, but you laid out the running backs that actually have upside. Rashad Penny, who is the Javion Hawkins. Remember we were drafting him?
Oh my God.
That guy was 106 pounds, man. Tutu Atwell.
Everybody made fun of Tutu Atwell and then drafted JV Hawkins. I'm at least Tutu plays wide receiver.
I would rather draft Quadre Olison, who cannot play, but at least if he could play, he would be on the field next to the goal line, So the player, that was the structure of how you guys drafted, 7 wide receivers versus 8 wide receivers versus 9 wide receivers. That matters to me a little bit less. I think that there's benefits in understanding that stuff, but the player archetype matters to me way, way, way more. You had outs to even if it wasn't going to be consistent each year, you just needed 6 weeks from James Conner, 6 weeks from Rashad Penny, the 2 weeks, and if you all align them at the same time or spread them out and then pop them off at the end, you're golden. So to me, it's all about the player archetypes within the builds.
100%. I'm totally biased because we had kind of a big hit and a real run in the finals, so that obviously sticks with you. But I think people. It's difficult. I'm curious on your take from this too. I think we understand the drastic differences between best ball tournaments again, and your regular home league, season long managed league or whatever.
Yeah.
But I don't think people understand some of the nuances of those differences. You just literally outlined exactly what happened to us. No one on our team with 6 running backs, there was not a single one of them where it was Cam Akers went down and we got the backup for the whole year, right? It was kind of just I don't know. We went into the year and it was we luck boxed some James Conner goal line touchdowns to start the year, and that was lucky. And then you luckbox Darrell Henderson's injury, Dalvin Cook's injury for a couple of weeks.
Yep.
It just kind of all fell together. But like that's the point, is we're trying for, and not even just with zero RB, that happened to be a zero RB team, but it could be with something else too. A totally different start, robust. Maybe you just piecemeal wide receiver together, and then boom, I got Amon-Ra St. Brown for the playoffs or whatever. Or 2 years ago, Justin Jefferson. And so I think that idea between like the difference between those things is very difficult to like wrap your head around. Have you thought about that at all?
Yep. I thought of one other thing that I haven't really talked about, but the difference between best ball tournaments and your standard leagues is the running backs. There is no picking up that running back that really breaks out. And when we're typically drafting, we're drafting about 70 running backs in a draft, which is about just over 2 running backs per team. Well, we know every single season there's going to be multiple teams that third running back is going to be on the field and playing and starting, just the way that either their roles are or just due to injuries. In the wide receiver position, we drafted about 110, and that's like 3 or 4. And what happens is, like, yes, those like wide receiver 4s that are like sometimes being drafted, they're still like most of the time at best the 3rd or 4th target on the team, so they're not even like having that many ceiling weeks even when they're starting. So in traditional leagues, you're picking up that running back. In best ball, like those running backs are just kind of sitting there. So I think like this year, going either with zero RB, hero RB, or superhero RB, drafting like only 2 or 3 in the early rounds. And I want to be super heavy on the wide receivers, like having 6 wide receivers by round 10, somewhere around there, and stop drafting wide receivers and like trust that my wide receiver valuations in the first top 10 rounds are going to win me. I'm not winning with wide receiver depth. I'm winning with like wide receiver talent. And then I want to play into those just ping ponging RB weeks later on in the draft.
Yeah. How have you thought about, I love your take on the quantity, the running back quantity thing. Cause last year, we always latch on to what happened last year, and anybody that's in like the Spike Week Discord, we've had tons of conversations around all these different things, but we're a couple of weeks away from draft season. And last year was a shining example of like some of the running back shit was like out of the gate, not just like, it always, like the Duke Johnson thing is like, people were like, oh, maybe I should draft Duke Johnson. I'm like, stop it. Like we don't need to you don't need him to win. But like Eli Mitchell was obviously very unforeseen, but like he was the 3rd running back on an offense that everybody was targeting, that loved. I mean, look at what the whole offense, every key player. Trey Lance was the goddamn backup quarterback, and he went in like the 9th round.
Yeah, exactly.
Like everybody loved this offense that much. CPAT. People were drafting Javian Hawkins and Quadri Allison. Mike Davis was a freaking 4th round pick or whatever for a while, because there was so much opportunity in that backfield, but we just never got around to CPAT. Have you thought about those like end of the draft things? Because I totally I wanted to call out your assessment of, I don't think the position matters that much. We actually talked about that on the stream when Peter and I drafted that Best Ball Mania team, where it was like, honestly, whoever the best player that fits this team is, I don't really care if it's a wide receiver or a running back, but those running backs back there, like, I think that's part of the evaluation that the market has screwed up historically.
Yeah, like the perfect example this year would be like 5th round Zamir White has more interest to me than like 3rd round Jalen Tolbert. Like if Jalen Tolbert he's probably going to be a wide receiver 4 to start the season. He might, if he gets lucky with an injury or just the wide receiver 3 had a bad camp and he is the wide receiver 3, he's going to have maybe some value, but still he'll probably be behind the tight end. He could be behind the pass catching running back. Zamir White will be the RB3 on somebody's team. And the RB2 in a lot of these teams are these James White type of players where their role doesn't change that much. And like he's an RB3 on the depth chart right now in playing time projections. But like if the goal line back goes away, like that James White player is not getting goal line reps, all of a sudden Zamir White is in there. So it seems like he's like further down just because he didn't have like initial playing time. But those, like Eli Mitchell is the perfect example, like 5th round or whatever he was in the NFL draft. But he just needed one injury, basically. Like he just needed Raheem Mostert to get out of the way because Trey Sermon was kind of in his own little role and he was adjusting himself, and they needed that speed guy, and he was the speed guy. So, yeah, I'm always interested in these rookies running backs. The draft capital matters a little bit, but if you're the RB3 on a team and you are over 205, 210 pounds, like I'm going to be in.
Yeah. God, the Mostert thing. I just remembered that was actually our first running back we took in on that Best Ball Mania team was Raheem Mostert, and made it. Week 1 was just an absolute disaster because I had a lot of Mostert. I drafted both of them, as you know. I was all in 49ers, and a lot of Mostert, and played Mostert like in DFS in week 1, and it was like, oh, one carry, there's the season. We just donked off a used Kia in one I paid Underdog Raheem Mostert's week 1 salary, basically.
You did
from one run. Thank you, Paul, for making me feel better and patting like I need to pat myself on the back anymore. But we did talk about Michelle, but that's another good example of those. We're talking about archetypes. Yep. A guy who we know is like at least good enough to be an NFL running back. Like Sony Michel was good at, like, more than good enough to be an NFL. He was better than probably like dudes we were drafted in the 15th round.
But for sure.
Just because of he was, like you said, with Mitchell, he was the RB3 on a team. They clearly were kind of pretty much out on him.
Yep.
And we didn't know what the hell was going to happen. Everybody was just like, nope, we're done. But it's like, worst case scenario, he's the RB3 on the Patriots.
Yep.
Okay, fine. That sucks, but he has paths. Best case scenario, he gets traded. Shocker. He gets traded and he's a workhorse. So the archetype thing is, again, why Sony Michel made for a great pick. I believe Drico out on Twitter won the FFPC big best ball tournament. Same thing. He took Sony Michel for the same reason. I believe he took him when he was on the Patriots as well. So the archetype thing is if there's anything you listen to from this entire thing, it's like thinking in archetypes, right? Yeah. There's like the thinking in bets, Annie Duke nonsense. Like, think in archetypes in this, and that is pretty much like I think that's like the number one thing you can learn.
I'll take another step forward, and I keep going back to this Cardinals example. Like, DeAndre Hopkins is somebody I want because I already know that I want to be betting on the team archetype. Like, if the Cardinals offense, if Cliff Kingsbury can figure his shit out and Kyler Murray is out there, this offense could be the number one scoring offense in the league. Just the way that they play, super fast paced. We know that they have some skill guys. So if I'm looking at DeAndre Hopkins versus somebody that's else right in that range, but I know that that wide receiver I don't want to be stacking with his quarterback, then screw it. I'm going to draft DeAndre Hopkins. That's nothing about DeAndre Hopkins' game that I'm liking versus like Terry McLaurin, but I don't want Carson Wentz stacks this year. I just don't want them. The ceiling is just not going to be nearly as high. So I'm going to look at the team dynamics, and I want DeAndre Hopkins, especially because I like Zach Ertz, because he has some potential in a fast-paced offense. And boom, I'm just already game planning in like round 3. Not because I'm high on DeAndre Hopkins this year. I can give a shit about his projection. I just know I want some pieces of this Cardinals offense, because if the Cardinals offense is good, I know they're going to be playing fast. So it's not just the actual players, it's the team archetypes as well, and it all kind of plays together.
I love that take, because you know me, very kind of anti projection, anti median, anti like traditional line of thinking, and that's not to throw shade, but like you said, people will decide their third or fourth round pick or whatever. And I like Terry. I probably like Terry McLaurin more than you do. God forbid I'm going to sign myself up for more fucking Carson Wentz.
Good luck, especially when they draft Drake London in the first round too.
Yeah, Jesus. Like the Michael Pittman ended up being like a net win last year, but it sure as fuck was a goddamn miserable experience with Carson Wentz. And so, like I said, I probably like McLaurin a little bit better than you, but it's the perfect example of when you get to week 17 and all goes well for both scenarios. All goes well for Washington, all goes well for the Cardinals. Do you want the wide receiver 1 on the Cardinals?
Yes.
Or do you want Carson Wentz and Washington's wide receiver 1? Yep. I know my answer. I don't actually think that's a debate. And like you said, we'll get to draft season and DeAndre Hopkins is old. He's coming off an injury, right? We don't like to draft old wide receivers, blah, 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 blah. And all that is fine. But that's a vacuum approach to DeAndre Hopkins himself, and not thinking, like you said, from a team archetype perspective. It's like Devontae Adams isn't that young. I'm not trying to necessarily compare the two, but it's like no one gives a shit about Devontae Adams' age ever, because he's just a baller on a good offense. Yep. But we'll apply it to other guys. So
I got to make a quick thing on the older wide receivers. It's all about the prices too. You know what? Not a single fantasy analyst is going to be touting Adam Thielen this year. Not a single one, because he's old.
No.
He's had injuries. Guess what happens with Adam Thielen? Nobody drafts him. He goes way too late versus where his projection could be. Adam Thielen last year, and I know it was like, I think it was over 8 games. He was the wide receiver 11 per game in scoring. That was with a healthy Justin Jefferson.
Yeah.
Adam Thielen is going to be the wide receiver 37 in draft in ADP this year, and not a single draft analyst is going to attach their name. So it's like, I think, and it sounds crazy because like this is not like what the consensus is among the drafted analysts. I think the older wide receivers are undervalued. Like we've overthought this. We've completely adjusted. Like Elijah Moore we're not sneaking in Elijah Moore anymore. He's like the wide receiver 20. Same thing with Amon-Ra St. Brown. We're not being very sneaky on these second year wide receivers. To me, it's the players that not a single analyst wants to attach their names to. Those are the values. It's Leonard Fournette, same thing. James Conner last year. All these Sony Michel, washed up players that we know have had success in the NFL. Like, I think I'm going to be buying the dip. AJ Green was another example. It's not fun being the guy that likes Kenny Pickett this year. It's not fun to be the guy that says Adam Thielen's a good value, because they're not the shiny new objects. So I think like those type of archetypes, I'm at least interested to, just because like Underdog, we got like all the smartest people like diving into it, and they always like the young players. But I think like the prices also matter a little bit too.
Definitely. And that's a big change. The reason why the younger player stuff was so in vogue and so profitable and successful was because the market wasn't in line with it, right? Like your point, like I freaking love Elijah Moore. Like I watch a lot of college football. I play a ton of college football DFS.
He's a beast.
If you ever watched Ole Miss, period, but if you watched Ole Miss when Elijah Moore was there, he like it didn't every Saturday against any, I don't give a shit which SEC defense, he dominated at 5'9", 175 or whatever.
He's good. Treylon Burks, that's my take. He's the exact same way, but he's actually good.
He's unreal. He's uncoverable. Like Ole Miss has tried to do things. Lane Kiffin, Ole Miss, mind you, not old school Ole Miss, has tried to do some different things. Like they didn't have the dudes this year to do it, and so Matt Corral had to run 25 times a game because they didn't have a dude that just cooked everybody. He cooked Bama. He cooked everybody. It didn't matter. He was unguardable. And so I'm a huge Elijah Moore fan. However, I can also set that aside and say Elijah Moore is like going in is going to go in like the end of the 4th round.
Yes.
Like and I'm not saying I won't take him, because God, you know me, I have a fucking brand to uphold here.
Right.
I'm not,
of course.
I'm not going to not.
We're out here doing content. Come on.
Yeah, exactly. But like maybe the better example is Devonta Smith. What has Devonta Smith done?
Yeah.
You know, I know he won I know he was awesome at Bama too, but like, what did he do last year to make you think that he should be a 5th round pick in the lowest volume passing offense in the NFL? But the market is hip to the fact that this is a potential superstar wide receiver who won the Heisman, who went in the 1st round. He's the 1B to Dallas Goedert, but he's the 1A, 1B in an offense, right? We get all of that. And so he goes at worst an efficient price. Like it's maybe at best an efficient price. At worst, it's like he's way overpriced, right? Like Adam Thielen probably beats Devonta Smith, like more often than not.
I would say over 50% chance.
Yeah, exactly. And so we have to weigh that, right? Like I like the young players too, but like last year, one of my highest exposure player was Latavius Murray, 32-year-old backup running back. Right, he gets cut, and you think that's the end, but I think it was
Baltimore.
I think it was either one of the playoff rounds or like the week before the playoffs or whatever. He had like 100 yards and 2 touchdowns on the Ravens, and it was like the greatest. It's like the greatest week of my life to be able to troll like Ben Gretch at yards per Gretch on Twitter. He would troll me about my Latavius exposure, but going back to the archetypes and the market evaluation, Latavius was like a 4th round pick. Like if Alvin Kamara went down, obviously that didn't work out, but he would be a workhorse, point blank, period. And the age thing pushed him all the way down. So is there any other trend that you think we might see for next year, kind of other than this age thing, wide receivers for sure, but anything else that you've kind of picked up on?
late round tight ends back and back big, like, for a couple of reasons. I think that the tight end 2 options this year, even you can probably throw in tight end 3 options, are better than they have been in a long time. Like players like David Njoku actually have paths. Gerald Everett has a path with Justin Herbert. I think a lot of those types at like the tight end 20 kind of actually makes sense. Robert Tunyon's back in that spot as well. And I think that the biggest reason is I think I've been looking at some of the data, and the early round tight ends just have not been hitting lately. And that's with like them playing pretty decent in general. This year, I'm looking at it. Travis Kelce's older. I don't think that he's going to have like a truly elite season. He's probably going to have a very good season. But Mark Andrews is going to have a different type of offense with Rashad Bateman potentially coming on, potentially more rush attempts. Kyle Pitts, we have no idea what the quarterback situation is going to look like. Darren Waller, obviously more target competition. George Kittle, pending Deebo Samuel, he's probably has a quarterback downgrade purely as a passer and just the way the offense is going to be set up. If the tight end 1s aren't having elite seasons, even if the tight end 2 scoring stays the same, they're going to become more valuable. We had the 4-for-4 tool that's out there. They talked about the 4 tight ends, and if you drafted them all after round 10, the win rates on those are absolutely absurd. And it makes sense. It's the position that is most tied to touchdowns. Touchdowns are week to week volatility stats. So if you can just win it with like a bunch of different tight ends late in the drafts, you're not investing that much in the position, but you're taking advantage of that variance in touchdown scoring. So I think I'm going to be on team do not draft the tight end, maybe a little Dalton Schultz, maybe a little Dawson Knox type, like in round 7, but I don't want the top 5 guys. I want like Gerald Everett and all those guys, and I want like a bunch of them.
Yeah, I actually love that take because I'm writing something about like league wide trends that I think we should get out in front of before they impact. Right, they haven't necessarily impacted fantasy yet. One of them has to do with running backs, shocker, but the other big one is actually tight ends, and I think the golden era of tight ends is like, basically over. We have Kyle Pitts left, essentially, maybe Mark Andrews, but like the fantasy producers at the tight end position, I like from that, right? Tony Gonzalez and Antonio Gates are not walking through that door anymore, and teams are going to use them less, and teams are, and even if they don't use the tight end less, it's going to be like, okay, we're going to use whatever. The Colts are one of my favorite examples because I drafted way too much Mo Alley Cox because he's a good football player, but he blocks. He's a blocker. They love him to block. We'll be like, okay, well, he's going to play 50% of the snaps because we want him to block. And then Doyle, I do like Kylan Granson. I'll fall into that.
He's decent.
I'll fall into that money pit again with the Colts tight end. But still, at best, I know it's like he's going to play 50% of the snaps. So like I think the tight end position is one that we can get out ahead of, where NFL teams are changing. The fantasy landscape is changing largely because of that. So the Kyle Pitts is a unicorn, but he's basically a wide receiver. Like he doesn't really get used like a tight end. So getting out in front of that is a big one. So we got about 15 minutes left before Hayden has to go. Let's get into some non best ball stuff. I always like to ask, like, so I think you and I have actually talked about this before. Last summer, we would have like happy hours and stuff here, and I think we talked about this a little bit. But how you talked that you got into Roto World kind of through a semi part-time gig and then into a full-time gig. But like, what about before then? How are we here right now? How are you and I here right now? What led to this? You like working full-time in fantasy sports?
Well, it's like a huge fantasy football obsession in middle school and high school, like I'm sure everybody in the industry. And then in college, I had a bunch of internships. Like I was doing like sports agency internships. I was an intern for the USC athletic department. So I did like a bunch of like stuff that's like not impacting anything with my career, but on a resume, it certainly looks at least like I'm trying. And that's like the huge key part of this. So right after college, that's about the time when I had that part-time job with Roto World. And I was just like waiting for somebody to leave so I can like try to fill that spot, which has been happening quite a bit lately. But I also at the same time was applying for the Chargers had an opening marketing job. And I was able to get that job. I was there for 1 year. Lots of fun. It was like cool experience. It always looks good on my resume, but I wanted to do the content part. I was trying to like, I was knocking on the Spanos's door, trying to get on the football operations side, but this was like the boomer Chargers, like not the new era Chargers. This was in 2017. So didn't have, they were like one of the few teams, like not just in football, but in all of American sports that didn't have a single person doing analytics. And I was like trying to be that person, but I got now waived. So went back to Roto World, and a position ended up opening up. And then from there, just this spot opened up at an Underdog, and I just took it.
I won't ask you to disclose anything, or I'm definitely not going to ask you to say anything negative. But how has the last year or so of Underdog, like, Underdog obviously coming from the draft days with Jeremy and the team and everything like that, and now spinning up Underdog, but kind of diving full force into the content space. It totally headlined by you guys, you and Josh. How has that been? How has it been working for? It's a very different role, right? Working for a platform as opposed to working for kind of a news and traditional sports content site.
I mean, I loved working at Roto World. I thought I was going to be at Roto World for the next 10 years, just work under RotoPat forever. The one difference between the Roto World job and at Underdog is actually doing like business stuff, like being in those business meetings, being in the marketing meetings, all that stuff, like actually figuring out how to run a website, not just doing content. So right now, like half my job is content, half my job is other things. And the other things is what's going to actually help me like in my career, like 15 years from now. Like what if like the industry just completely gets evaporated? Like I just didn't want to be a fantasy football analyst and then like have to try to go into like a marketing job later in another industry. I wanted to at least have a little bit of both. So that's like the coolest part. Everyone that works at Underdog's awesome. But for me personally, like the biggest difference was just I can actually make an impact on the business side and not have to just do content.
Yeah, that's great. And that's something I've, from an outsider perspective, picked up on what Underdog is doing. And it's awesome. It's awesome to give, because that's, again, I'm biased because that's how it is for me. I obviously, as we're talking here, I do tons of content. I write, I do everything kind of similar to you. We have very similar roles from a public facing perspective, but I do tons of stuff on the back end as well. And that's actually how I got into the space, was all behind the scenes typically. And then apparently when you win a little bit of money, or you do something that people are like, oh, that's good, they're like, hey, would you like to do some more content? And the next thing I knew, I'm fucking hosting a show on Sunday mornings. Like like I'm like, what? Like when I took this job 5 years ago, I did not expect to be spending my Sunday mornings on YouTube telling people who to play for DFS. But such is life. So okay, you mentioned SC. We got to talk about the Pac-12 really quickly. It used to be, I mean, the SC days, Reggie Bush is probably my favorite college football player of all time. He was right in our wheelhouse. We're close enough to the same age. The Reggie Bush USC era was like, I'm trying to even figure out it was kind of like the college football version of what Vince Carter did in the NBA, not necessarily like the absolute best player on the planet, but the highlights.
You're just so sick.
And it's like it was like nothing we had ever seen before from a college player. How did you kind of like, was SC where you always wanted to go? How did the fandom and going there, how did that all come together?
Yes, I'm like 45 minutes south of LA. Nobody in my family.
Where at?
I'm in Huntington Beach. I currently live in Irvine. And nobody in my family went to USC, but we were massive USC fans. I don't remember the story of how that happened, but we had like season tickets in like the 2000 when I was like I was 6 years old. That was like right before Carson Palmer. Like these USC years were terrible, but like I grew up in the tailgate scene at USC, like when we were like 7 and 5 seasons for like years. And then all of a sudden I'm like 9 years old, 10 years old. And like, that's like peak. You're wearing a football jerseys to school years. And like, I thought I was hot shit, cause we had Matt Leinart and Reggie Bush. Like that was not good for the fandom to be 10 years old, be that impressionable, and to have like literally the coolest college football team there ever was. So I always wanted to go to USC. My grades in high school were bad. And I went to a smaller school, Long Beach State. I was there for a year and a half, got my grades, actually was trying in school. And I was able to transfer over to USC. And that's like, was like the start off of like actually getting into like marketing and econ and all that type of stuff. So I was a kind of a late bloomer when it came to like trying in school, but once I actually tried, it actually was paying off.
Yeah, I think I was the opposite. I tried enough in high school to get by, and then college came around, and I was like, "Wait, I don't have to go to class?
Yeah.
Like, they're not gonna make me go go
Once
to
I got
class?"
to USC, I turned back into like being that like,
Yeah.
all right, I could just have to pass. But like to get to USC, I basically timed it perfectly where I have like the cool degree, but I only had to try like really hard for a year and a half to get into the
Right.
school because they weren't looking at my high school grades. And
Yep.
once I got to USC, nobody's asked me what my GPA is since I graduated. So I really, it was just like for a year and a half, I had to try in school, and I got the most out of it. So shout out to me.
Yeah. I remember those days where, like, I feel like I'm intelligent enough to get very good grades if I really wanted to. And my mother and my dad didn't give a shit. My dad's famous saying was C's get degrees. And
Same.
so that's about what that's how much he cared about school. My mother was like, no, you need to get straight A's. Like, why are you not, why are you not getting straight A's? And so when I was not, on the dean's list, when I was fucking around in school, she was not very happy. And now, like, we look back and I'm like, I don't remember one goddamn thing any of those teachers
Right.
said, nor does it matter. We're talking about fucking fantasy football.
Yeah, it really doesn't matter, man, at
Like,
all.
I have a finance degree, and I couldn't tell you anything about
Same.
any of that. Naturally, Tony is in the chat, winner of a freaking $1 million last year, that says school is overrated. Yeah, I'm sure that if I won $1 million last year, I also would say that school is overrated. I was just gonna say, it's funny. I traveled to Huntington Beach 6 times a year, probably for 3 or 4 years. I worked for Boeing out of high school. And I worked for our analytics department, actually. And our office was in Huntington Beach.
Seal Beach Boeing.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. My mom worked at Seal Beach Boeing for 30 years. No joke.
That's hilarious. So
I literally live on, like, I grew up like on Bolsa Chica, like literally right off of, like, I was, no joke, less than 3 minutes away from the Boeing headquarters. Yeah, small world.
I could probably still drive, do the Huntington Beach and to Seal Beach drive. We would stay
right down the naval base. Yep.
Yep. Exactly. Right by the naval base. So it's a small, very, very small world. That two people talking about best ball.
There's only like 6 of us doing best ball analyst like full time, and they both happen to be right next to each other.
Yeah, exactly. Wild. That is so funny. So there was one other thing I was going to ask, and you talked about the Roto World days. I think anybody that grew up kind of like we did in the fantasy sports space, Roto World was like one of the most impactful places. You also kind of mentioned, people have left. You left, Josh left, Evan left, even Daigle has left now. Lots of people have left, but you talked about, again, like, thought you might work there forever, but like, how was just generally that experience and working with everybody? There's so many of like the most famous names and the biggest names in this entire fantasy football space are from Roto World, and you can say that you were a part of that.
Yeah. I mean, it was like, that was like the dream job. Like I was prouder to be working for Roto World than I was like the Chargers. And I think like most people be like, you're crazy, but like I grew up listening, reading all of that stuff. I think what's happened is the industry's gotten so damn big, and I think a lot of it was DFS related, and I'm hoping best ball is like the next wave of that there's just so many other companies that are competing. And like, obviously, if you're launching a new company, there's way more upside. So that's kind of what happened with some of the Roto people. Like, working at Roto World is awesome. Like, you're working in sweats and everyone's reading. Like, when you post something on Roto World, like, you are getting eyeballs on that thing. So that, like, that's where it was like really cool to like really try to make a name for myself. Like, everybody was on that website no matter what. So if you had any clue and you were a good writer, you were going to be able to make a name for yourself. Like Matthew Berry, Greg Rosenthal, Chris Wesson, like, everybody has worked at Roto World. So I was like super, super proud of that. And I was like really grinding my balls off, doing like, I wasn't a college football bro, but like I was able to like know all these running backs and all these crazy players, just trying to make a name for myself to go on the NFL side.
Yeah, that's awesome. Before we wrap up, you mentioned Silva was kind of what got you on, and I do just want to shout out, one of the greatest in the entire industry, because he actually, in a bizarre way, helped me get to where I am right now. And I had never met Evan before in my entire life. Many years ago, I founded a startup in the fantasy football space, and was just trying to get things rolling like any other startup does. I cold DM'd Evan. I asked him to follow me. He followed me back. I cold DM'd him. Within 30 seconds, he said, "Call me."
Yep. Same thing with me.
Sent me his number. We talked for a long time, and he was like, "I'm in, let's do it." And he helped me do kind of everything that I needed to do to get my startup off the ground. There was no reason he had to do that. He still had 200,000 followers or whatever at that time, and helped me get a start. That startup obviously is not where I still am today, but it's what led me to my job in this space. And like, I'm forever thankful. So it's funny, again, small world, where Evan has kind of helped out multiple people in this space. I don't know if you have a story or just anything you want to talk about Evan.
Yeah, he's created a ton of jobs for people. With me, he was on the Ross Tucker show, and he had a theory that players coming off their bye week, it was always thought of as like a good thing, that they were like well rested and they're like ready. They had multiple weeks to prepare, but he was like, all the players I'm picking in DFS are having bad weeks off the bye week. And he was like theorizing that there might be something else that was at play with this too. So I did some research just based off that podcast. I had my spreadsheets were open as always. And I just replied to his tweet about of the podcast. And I was like, here's the data on it. And like, there's a little bit more variance. I'm sure that data that I was pulling from was stupid now, but I'm sure I'd be not happy with the results I was trying to find there. But he was like right about it. He got me a Roto World column up there, and like just from there called me a couple times. And like all of a sudden I was like a part-time writer. So he's awesome because he's actually looking at some of his stuff. Like that's pretty rare to be responding for how big he was. But yeah, I've heard a similar story to ours a couple times from him. It's like a good thing to like always remember, like when people reach out, like try to respond back. Easier said than done, but it got me a job for sure.
I just thought it was a cool thing to bring up as we wrap up, because you know how it goes. We're about to get into draft season. We're all going to be bitching at each other over the shit that matters and what doesn't matter, and robust running back versus zero running back, and advance rate versus and all this stupid shit.
Yeah,
that really doesn't mean anything. But at the end of the day, I do think the industry is pretty awesome. There's always bad actors in every industry, but when you're headlined by a lot of really good people, and there's so many good people, and like it's just crazy. Like the both of us essentially are here today from the goodwill from somebody that had absolutely no reason that they needed to do anything for us. So Hayden has to run. He's got to go do another show. But thank you for joining. This was awesome. I love doing these. Absolutely love doing these shows. These are my favorite ones. These will continue for my Spike Week folk. These will continue on throughout the summer. So we won't always be talking strategy and doing drafts and all that. There's going to be a lot of that coming, but we'll definitely keep these going, because these are some of my favorites, and we'll bring on tons of people from around the industry. But Hayden's got to get out of here. For myself and for Hayden, we will see you guys later. I'll be back tomorrow. You'll check out Spike Week on Twitter, and you'll see what's coming tomorrow. Catch you guys later.